As your dentist will readily tell you, flossing is important for your health. But soon it may become even more so as scientists invent a new way to deliver vaccines. Not through shots, but through floss. Now, it's pretty intuitive that flossing is important for your oral health. Gets those little bits of food or bacterially produced biofilms out from all those nooks and crannies. After all, even though it's normal for bacteria to live in our mouth, that doesn't mean it's healthy to let them run wild. In fact, you may have heard about how flossing is good for your health outside your mouth as well. Regular flossing reduces your risk of cardiovascular incident and stroke. Like, by a lot. Recent preliminary findings presented at the American Stroke Association's International Conference found that regular flossing is associated with a 22% lower risk of traditional stroke, a 44% reduced risk of the kind of stroke where a clot travels from your heart to your brain, and a 12% decreased risk of a type of irregular heartbeat called atrial fibrillation. Flossing also reduces your risk of infective endocarditis, which is when an infection, most commonly from bacteria, affects the innermost layer of your heart's tissue. Infective endocarditis has a 10 to 30% mortality rate, so yeah, we really don't want that. But what is the connection exactly? We may have a fuzzy sort of notion of, oh, mouth bacteria get into your bloodstream through your gums and cause problems. But how? Why? Of all the places where bacteria live within and upon us, what's the deal with gums in particular? To understand that, let's talk about barriers. Not emotional barriers, but tissue barriers. Our bodies have tons of barriers to keep insides protected from outside. Skin is a pretty obvious example. If our skin weren't a good barrier, the water inside our bodies would evaporate right out of us, and all the bacteria and environmental contaminants on our skin would have free access to all the organs in our body, which would be, scientifically speaking, bad. But we also have a lot of barriers inside us. Our gut is full of bacteria. They're a crucial part of our health. But I also want them to stay in my gut and not in my bloodstream, right? Fortunately, there are specialized layers of cells called epithelial cells that collectively create that barrier. Imagine these are the cells that make up your gut barrier, just as an example. Our guts are a tube, and you have little villi that are on the food side of your intestine, if you will. And that's the side with all the bacteria. The bottoms of these cells, the outside of the tube, leads to the circulation for the rest of the body. So you want to keep the bacteria on the villi side, the apical side, and not let them sneak past to the basolateral side, where they could cause havoc in our bodies. Now, obviously our guts aren't completely impermeable, or we couldn't absorb food and water through them. So these cells have special proteins, those tight junctions, and a bunch of adhesion molecules that keep these cells tightly velcroed to their neighbors so that bacteria can't squeeze in between the cells, the paracellular pathway in this graphic. So when everything goes according to plan, our intestine absorbs nutrients and so on through the transcellular pathway of the villi, which allows the cell to act as a bouncer that controls what goes through, instead of the paracellular pathway where anything could kind of just fall through the cracks, like sneaking in through the side door of an alley. And that's the basic principle behind a lot of cellular barriers between us and the outside world. The intestines have a whole lot of special permissions to allow stuff through because, well, they do that whole absorbing nutrients thing. That's their job. But there's similar barriers on the inside of our mouth or the inside of our nose and so on. And those have an extremely restricted list of things that are allowed through the transcellular pathway. And they've got all the junctional Velcro proteins to prevent anything nasty from squeezing on through. That's not to say that the Velcro never loosens. Actually, a lot of our body's barriers become more permeable with inflammation. And that seems wild, Surely if the tissue's inflamed, it's because there's a problem, and we should want even more security lockdown, right? Well, increasing barrier permeability could let things like bacteria and their products through, yes, but that cuts both ways. After all, sometimes we need to send cells from our circulation to the business side of the barrier, if you will, especially immune cells, so that they can directly confront whatever is causing the inflammatory problem. In fact, that helps us understand a little more of why flossing helps mitigate our risk of disease. By preventing gum disease and inflammation, we're keeping our epithelial barriers nice and happy and Velcroed tight so nothing obnoxious can get past the barrier into our bloodstream and give us awful infective endocarditis or something. And that brings us to why gums in particular. Like I said, each epithelial barrier has some unique properties because each one has a specialized job to do, like gut barrier versus inside of your cheek barrier. And they have a lot of variation in how permeable they are. And way down in your gums, right where it meets the tooth, is what's called the junctional epithelium. And even in healthy gums, it is a particularly permeable epithelial barrier. Whereas most of the barriers in our mouth are pretty locked down, the junctional epithelium in our gums is the one permeable enough to send antimicrobial products and, if needed, immune cells into the oral cavity. For healthy gums, that's a worthwhile trade-off, because our mouth needs some kind of security on standby, and our gums are a major doorway they go through. It's only when that barrier breaks down in gum disease that the balance is no longer in our favor and becomes too much permeability. So now we understand why our gums are the way they are and why it's important to keep them healthy to prevent bacterial crap from getting into our bloodstream. But this week's research, published in Nature Biomedical Engineering, is all about using that permeability to our advantage with vaccines. Most vaccines are given by injection, so you don't have to worry about barriers at all. The barrier is the skin, and the needle goes right through, so it's delivered to our muscle tissue and eventually hits our bloodstream. But even though injection is the most common way to deliver a vaccine, it's hardly the only way we try to deliver them. There are intranasal vaccines that deliver a liquid spray right into your nose, and sublingual vaccines that go under your tongue. There are a lot of advantages to these kind of vaccines, and not just that you don't have to get a shot. They're actually great at providing immunity at those mucosal surfaces like the ones in your nose and mouth, which are super relevant if you're trying to immunize against airborne or droplet-based diseases like the flu. Problem is, we've been learning about barriers, right? The epithelium inside your nose and under your tongue are fairly strong barriers as these things go. So one of the challenges to those kind of vaccines is getting enough dose past the epithelial barrier to the circulation side, where immune cells can pick it up, create antibodies, and otherwise get that good adaptive immunity going. So for something like the flu, what we'd really like is to deliver the vaccine through a barrier at these nasal or oral mucosal surfaces for strong immunity at the sites we need it most. And at this point, I bet you're picking up what I'm putting down because the gums have exactly what we're looking for. The idea then is simple. Coat dental floss with a little nanoparticle that has a protein or peptide antigen, like a traditional vaccine, or an mRNA of the antigen. There were some experiments with humans, but this part of the study was performed on mice. So yes, the next step was flossing the little mousie's teeth, a process these researchers had to figure out for themselves. Anyway, the nanoparticles on the floss make it through the junctional epithelial barrier of the gums to the immune cells, which, remember, are right there on call because this is where we send them in if there's a problem in the oral cavity. And the immune cells pick up the vaccine antigen. From there, it works pretty much like any other vaccination. The results, immunity-wise, were better than sublingual vaccination and comparable to intranasal vaccines, and they got strong antibody responses at the mucosal surfaces of the mouth, nose, lungs, gut, and others, which again matters a ton for respiratory infections. The floss vaccine worked regardless of age, effectiveness was unchanged with or without food or drink, and the humans who tried it reported it was painless, easy to use, and preferable to a traditional needle-style vaccine. In fact, participants reported they were twice as likely to actually get a COVID vaccine if it were in floss form. It's such smart engineering. Even though gum health is usually viewed as something to maintain lest something bad happen, these researchers took advantage of this quirk of the mammalian body, namely the unusually leaky barrier in our gums, and turned it into an asset for our immune system. It's so galaxy brain! Like, imagine thinking up this idea. Oh, yeah, obviously we should vaccinate people with floss. But you know what? I'm into it. Of course, we'll need future studies and clinical trials to ensure it's effective with humans, including humans with pre-existing oral or periodontal conditions. But as proof of concept, we may have a new method of vaccination on our hands. Or, more accurately, in our mouths.